For almost a decade of marriage, Emily convinced herself that love mattered more than rituals. A wedding ring, she thought, was just a piece of metal, not the essence of commitment. But one quiet evening, while tidying the drawers, she discovered a black velvet box. Inside gleamed a pair of rings, engraved not with her name, but with that of another woman, Claire. In that instant, Emily's world shattered. The truth struck her harder than any betrayal. The promise she had waited for all these years was never meant for her. On the day of her wedding, Emily told herself not to expect too much. There was no grand ceremony, no sparkling gown designed for fairy tales, and certainly no ring exchanged at the altar. The celebration was modest, a small dinner arranged mostly to satisfy both families. Daniel, her groom, whispered that he had forgotten the rings and promised to make it up to her later. Emily smiled and nodded, pretending it didn't matter. In her heart, she told herself, love is more important than symbols. A ring is just an object. What I need is his devotion. For years afterward, she clung to that belief. She cooked his meals, washed his clothes, supported his career, and cared for his aging parents. She gave him a son, stayed awake through fevers, balanced bills, and carried the quiet weight of an entire household. And yet, every night when she slipped into bed, her finger felt strangely bare. Sometimes she would glance at her friend's hands, adorned with golden bands, and her chest tightened. Still, when people asked why she didn't wear a wedding ring, she answered with a practiced smile, "Daniel forgot." It's not a big deal, but the truth lay in the way Daniel spoke about Claire. Claire, the woman from his youth, the luminous first love who had once walked out of his life but never truly left his heart. Her name appeared in little slips of conversation. Claire loved this song. Claire always wanted to visit this city. Claire would never do that. Every mention was like a pinprick against Emily's silence. She never confronted him, never argued, never demanded an explanation. Instead, she swallowed her pain with a bitter smile, telling herself that marriage required patience, that Daniel would one day realize her worth. Even small details revealed the shadow she lived under. On anniversaries, he often forgot to buy her flowers. At family gatherings, he praised Claire's accomplishments as though they were brighter, more significant than anything Emily had achieved. At night, when he thought she was asleep, she sometimes heard him whisper a name, not hers. The sound was soft, almost tender, and it carved fresh wounds across her heart. Emily became a master of disguises. She learned how to mask disappointment with laughter, how to turn jealousy into silence, how to stitch cracks in her soul so no one would notice. Outwardly, she looked like the perfect wife, attentive, quiet, uncomplaining. Inwardly, she was shrinking, becoming smaller each year. Her existence reduced to the shadow of another woman who wasn't even there. The missing wedding ring grew into a symbol of everything she lacked. It was not the medal she longed for, but the recognition. The affirmation that she was truly Daniel's partner and not a placeholder. Without it, she felt invisible, like a guest in her own marriage. Sometimes, in the stillness of a night, she clasped her bare hand under the covers, whispering to herself, "One day, he'll give it to me. One day, I'll matter." But deep down, Emily knew the truth. If a promise is never spoken, if love is always directed elsewhere, a ring will never arrive. And so she waited, year after year, trapped in a marriage built on hope, while the ghost of Claire lingered between them, gleaming brighter than any diamond ever could. It happened on an ordinary evening, the kind of night when silence felt heavier than words. Emily was tidying the bedroom, folding laundry that smelled faintly of detergent and exhaustion, when she pulled open the bottom drawer of Daniel's dresser. She noticed a velvet box tucked into the corner, nearly hidden beneath old ties. Her heart hesitated. It looked too deliberate, too secret. For a moment, she told herself not to open it, that curiosity would only invite disappointment. But her hands trembled as if guided by something stronger than will. The box clicked open. Inside lay 2 wedding rings, their silver edges glinting even in the dim light. She leaned closer, her breath shallow. On the inside of the bands were etched delicate words: Daniel, Claire. The air left her lungs. The ground seemed to tilt beneath her feet. It wasn't just that Daniel had lied about forgetting their rings. It wasn't even that he had kept them hidden all these years. It was the cruel reality the engraving revealed. From the very beginning, the promise had never been hers. She had not been the chosen one. She had been the replacement, the placeholder for the woman he could not have. Emily sank to the floor, clutching the box as if it burned her palms. 1,000 memories rushed back, every moment of sacrifice, every time she had silenced her doubts, every tear swallowed in the dark. All of it, the years of loyalty, the endless patience, suddenly collapsed under the weight of those 4 engraved letters. Claire's name shone brighter than her own existence. That night, she could not sleep. She lay beside Daniel, staring at the ceiling while he snored softly, oblivious. Her bare finger felt like a scar, mocking her. She wondered how many times he had opened that box, tracing the letters with his thumb, dreaming of a life that excluded her. Perhaps, she thought bitterly, he whispered Claire's name, not only in sleep, but in his heart every waking hour. The following days were torture. She tried to pretend nothing had happened, but the knowledge gnawed at her. When Daniel laughed at a joke, she wondered if Claire would have laughed louder. When he complimented another woman's dress, she wondered if Claire had worn something similar. Even the way he poured his coffee seemed like a ritual learned from someone else. The house became a museum of absence, filled with invisible reminders of the woman who had never left. Emily's pain turned into anger, though she buried it under routine. She cooked, cleaned, smiled at neighbors, attended school meetings for their son. Yet, inside, she screamed, "Why was I never enough? Why did he marry me if his heart belonged to someone else?" One evening, she placed the box on the dining table, waiting for Daniel to come home. She wanted to confront him, to force the truth out into the open. But when he entered, weary from work, he kissed her cheek distractedly and asked what was for dinner. Emily froze. Her throat tightened. She couldn't do it, not yet. She swept the box back into her apron pocket, hiding the evidence as she had hidden her sorrow for so many years. But something inside her had shifted forever. The secret she carried was no longer just a wound. Every second she stayed, the truth corroded her from within. And in the stillness of night, with the whisper of Claire's name echoing through her mind, Emily realized the life she had built was nothing more than a stage set, and she was playing a role that had never been written for her. The silence could not last forever. The velvet box weighed on Emily's chest like a stone. Every time she looked at Daniel, every time she set food on the table or folded his shirts, the memory of those engraved rings pressed against her ribs. The truth demanded to be spoken. It happened one evening as they sat across from each other at dinner. Their son had gone to bed. The house was hushed. Emily's fork clinked against her plate, her hands trembling. She lifted her gaze and asked, quietly, almost too quietly, "Daniel, whose rings are they?" His knife froze halfway through cutting his steak. For a brief moment, his expression cracked. Shock flickered across his face before he smoothed it into practiced calm. "What rings?" he asked, feigning ignorance. "The ones in your drawer," Emily pressed. Her voice was steady now, but her heart was pounding. "The ones engraved with Claire's name." Daniel inhaled sharply, then leaned back in his chair, sighing as though burdened by a trivial matter. "Emily, that was a long time ago. They don't mean anything, just old memories. You're overthinking this." But his eyes betrayed him. He couldn't meet her stare. He looked away, fiddling with his napkin, shifting uncomfortably. Emily felt her chest hollow out. For 10 years, she had been living in a marriage built on a lie. Something inside her hardened. For the first time, she didn't weep or beg. She didn't try to explain herself or search for excuses. Instead, a calmness settled over her, the stillness of someone who had finally reached the end of her endurance. That night, when Daniel had fallen asleep, Emily packed a small suitcase. She folded clothes with precise, quiet movements, her breath steady. She walked into her son's room. The boy stirred as she touched his hair, whispering, "Come on, sweetheart. We're going on a trip." He blinked sleepily, but when he saw the determination in her eyes, he didn't argue. He trusted her completely. As she carried him to the car, Emily felt a clarity she hadn't known in years. She realized that staying would mean raising her child in a house built on deception, teaching him that silence was love, that betrayal was normal. No, she couldn't allow that. Driving away from the house, she glanced once in the rearview mirror. The windows glowed faintly, Daniel's silhouette visible against the curtain. He was still asleep, unaware that the life he had taken for granted was slipping away. Emily's chest tightened, but she didn't falter. This time, she was not running in fear. She was walking toward freedom. The first night in the small motel, Emily held her son close and whispered a vow, not to Daniel, not to anyone else, but to herself. "I will never be a shadow again. I will never beg for love that isn't mine. From now on, I will choose myself." The realization was painful, but liberating. For years, she had prayed that Daniel would change, that one day he would finally give her the ring she deserved. Now, she understood the cruel truth. Waiting for love from someone who worships another is the most dangerous kind of prison. Emily finally found her voice. And with that voice, she would begin to rebuild her life. The morning after, Daniel woke to find the house silent. But when he noticed the empty closet, the missing suitcase, and the absence of his son's toys, panic clawed at his chest. He tore open drawers, searching until he saw the velvet box lying on the table, the rings glinting under the pale morning light. For the first time, he understood. She knew everything. Emily didn't answer his frantic calls. Days stretched into weeks, and when the divorce papers finally arrived, Daniel's world crumbled. He tried to confront her, to beg for forgiveness, but Emily's voice was steady on the phone. "This marriage was never mine, Daniel. You gave your vows to someone else long before me. I won't let my son grow up in a lie." Then she hung up, leaving him in silence. The weight of regret soon crushed him. Without Emily's steady hands, the household fell apart. His parents, once cared for by her, became distant, disappointed in him. At work, his performance faltered. The colleagues who once admired his charm began to whisper behind his back. The ghost of Claire, once his sweetest memory, turned bitter. He realized that clinging to a lost love had destroyed the woman who had stood by him in flesh and blood. Meanwhile, Emily faced her own battles. Raising her son alone was not easy. There were nights she cried quietly, exhaustion heavy on her shoulders. But unlike before, her tears no longer came from helplessness. They were the tears of a woman who was fighting, surviving, and slowly reclaiming her life. She found a new job, modest but stable. She rented a small apartment, plain yet filled with warmth. Every corner of it spoke of freedom. No ghosts, no lies, no shadows. Months passed. Daniel showed up once outside her workplace, thinner, his eyes sunken. He held out the old velvet box, trembling. "Emily," he whispered, "I'm sorry. Please, take it now. It should have always been yours." Emily looked at him, at the man who once held her heart captive. She saw the desperation in his eyes, the cracks in his pride. But instead of anger or longing, she felt only clarity. She gently pushed the box back into his hands. A ring engraved with another woman's name was never mine to take, she said softly. And now I no longer need one to prove my worth. Daniel collapsed onto the curb, clutching the box like a relic of his sins. Emily turned away, her son's hand safely in hers. For the first time, she walked without looking back. Years later, life had changed. Emily had built a small business, enough to support her family. Her son grew into a kind young man, proud of his mother's strength. One spring afternoon, as the city bloomed with flowers, a man knelt before her in a quiet garden. His name was Michael, a gentle soul who had stood by her during her hardest days. In his hands was a new ring, plain, unadorned, but engraved with a single name, Emily. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they were tears of joy. She nodded, allowing him to slip the band onto her finger. It was not just metal, not just a promise. It was proof that she was seen, cherished, chosen. As the sunlight warmed her skin, Emily smiled. She was no longer the woman without a ring. She was the woman who had found her freedom and her true love. Emily's story reminds us that love without respect is nothing more than a cage. A wedding ring is not just a piece of jewelry. It is a symbol of being chosen, honored, and valued. When that promise is denied, when your existence is overshadowed by someone else's ghost, you owe it to yourself to walk away. Too often, women are told to endure, to forgive, to wait for a change that never comes. By leaving, she did not lose. She gained her voice, her dignity, and eventually a love that was truly hers. This story is not just about betrayal. It is about rebirth. It is about every woman who has ever felt invisible, forgotten, or unloved. You are not a shadow. You are not a replacement. You are worthy of being chosen first, always. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs the reminder. And tell us in the comments, would you stay for a love that hides you or walk away to find the love you deserve.